So then let's get into just the foundation of Neuroptimal. Why does it work? Where did it come from, and why is it able to work in our brains? One of the things that is so incredibly interesting about Neuroptimal, it is one of the only, if not the only, system that I'm aware of that does not ever put anything into the brain. So it puts no electrical current in the brain. It takes no electrical current out of the brain. All it's doing is measuring that electrical current. Now, if it's only measuring the electrical current, then why does it work? Why would it, why would it do what it does? Why do we hear these incredibly passionate stories about how life changed for them after doing this process? And they have. I mean, we have for really 20 something years now, we have story after story after story of people who believe their life has just totally transformed because of this. We could have some placebo effect. Somebody loves their trainer and therefore they're going to respond in a certain way. But that cannot be for everybody. It can't be that way for the thousands of people. Mark, what are the stats right now on how many people use Neuroptimal?
There are over 50,000 sessions a month worldwide happening on the system. And to date, there's been over 4 million sessions run.
Now, can you fathom that is all placebo? No. So what is the science behind it? Why does it work? Let's get into that. One of the things that we have to know about our brains, and probably many of you already do know, is that it is considered the kind of the command and control center of the body. And it is it's the center of the central nervous system. So when we use the terminology or the abbreviation CNS, that's what we're talking about. Within the brain, we have, well, billions of neurons. Each of these neurons have thousands of what we call synaptic connections. Those synaptic connections are run by electrical current. When they spark, they create an electrical chemical response. And the interesting thing about this is that it's almost like a strobe light. This electrical current can be called a pulse. It also is sometimes called an oscillation. And it happens at very specific frequency levels. Now, the thing to remember with the brain is when a spark occurs or when the pulse occurs, and in whatever frequency level it is not predictable. It is very chaotic. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have meaning. Think about being in a train station or an airport. That's chaos. People are going all different directions all the time, and they're all, but they rarely run into each other. People know where they're going and they go to it. But to look down on it, it's total chaos. We don't know where they're going. We have no idea. And yet they're going all over the place. This is what happens in a chaotic system. It's not predictable. We can't determine if I were to stimulate this neuron, it's going to react with this other synaptic connection or this dendritic connection. We cannot do that because it's not predictable. We can only witness it. So when we talk about the brain and the synaptic connections, and we talk about kind of that strobe that is happening, it really is like in this picture. It's like a flickering that is flickering on and off. And because it is chaotic, we never know that when one neuron sends out that spark, we never know exactly which dendritic connection is going to turn on and which is going to turn off. Because we have no rhythm, we have no pattern. It is totally 100% a chaotic, what we would call a chaotic dance. Now, that's not to say that our brain doesn't know what it's doing. It knows what it's doing. It is influencing another dendritic connection to either turn on or turn off. Cognitively, we don't know yet. Now, one of these days, we'll learn more about the brain and really understand that. But in this moment, we still do not understand why one turns on one and why it turns off on another. What we do know is it takes a lot of spark, a heavy, strong spark, or what we would call an electrical impulse, to go from the back of the head all the way to the front of the head. So for a dendritic connection to be able to make that electrical impulse travel from way back in the occipital lobe all the way to the prefrontal cortex, that's a strong electrical impulse. And it may not only be one dendritic connection that's doing that. It may be that it initiates several of them to be able to get to travel that far. But when we look at the entire overall landscape of it, it's really interesting how one tiniest, smallest sound can trigger this huge avalanche of sparking, of electrical current. And it may only be because you heard a twig snap, or you heard one tiny little bitty thing that makes it fire. In this picture, you can see that when it turns red, it has now sparked throughout the entire brain. What we measure in the brain, when we talk about an electrical impulse, we are measuring the voltage fluctuation. Now, interestingly, we have voltage, we have electrical current everywhere. We live in a very electrically noisy environment. We've got radio waves, we've got microwaves, we have X-ray equipment, we have wall current, we have the current that comes off of our computers and out of our phones. And I mean, we have a very, what we call dirty electrical environment. And so one of the challenges is, how do we catch just the voltage fluctuation in the brain versus everything else that's going on in, out there in the world? One of the things that's important to understand about the brain is how complex it really is. It's considered a dynamical structure. Now, what we mean by dynamical is that it not only is changing, like the word dynamic means, it's in change, but more than that, it's changing because of what it just did. So it's learning from its change, and it's doing something different because of what it just did and what happened when it did it. So the brain and the central nervous system is considered a dynamical structure. Now, this is really important to understand the difference between dynamic and dynamical. Dynamic is in movement. Dynamical is learning from that movement or doing something different because of what it just did. Maybe it didn't really learn, but it's doing something different because of what happened. We are always trying to respond in the most efficient way possible. Now, when we talk about people that have trauma, or we talk about people that have disorders, or we talk about, the one thing that they have in common is that they are not responding in an efficient way. They are not flexible, and they are not resilient. They're not able to do this dynamical process in the way that they need to be able to function. When we work with Neuroptimal, we aren't working with the problem, because whatever the diagnosis is, whatever the concern is, that's not what matters. The basic concern is that this individual's central nervous system is unable to process information quickly and respond to it quickly and do what it naturally was meant to do. We in our house continue to use it no matter who we are, no matter, what our issues or non-issues are. It helps us perform at a higher level. It helps us, use that ability to function with resilience and with flexibility. So one of the ways that that happens is that anytime anything is not in our immediate consciousness, we are able to set it aside and move on and do something else. And that is part of that efficiency that we talk about with brain dynamics. So because our brain is dynamical, it is always changing. You go to school and you learn something new. Hopefully you learn something new here in this course. That will change the platform of your brain. When I said early on, let's set everything aside that you have already learned so that you can really understand the basis of this program, it was so that you were able to take in this new information and see it, hear it. All of our senses are filters for the information we take in. And so this really, when I say set it aside, it allows us to learn something totally new as we go through this.
So for clarification, dynamic means always changing. Okay? Dynamical means changing and adapting to those changes.
So the language that our body is actually speaking to itself is dynamical. It's always looking for those changes and the differences, and it reports it back to itself. So it is always in detection of change. It is always trying to detect change. So the brain's ability to create these pathways and adapt to this new set of change is not only essential for learning, but for surviving. And that is what we call a self-organizing dynamic system. It's always changing because of what it just did. So the differences between dynamic and dynamical, I'll just repeat for Mark, for exactly what Mark said, is dynamic refers to change, whereas dynamical refers to changes in how change happens as it's happening. And that's a direct quote from Val. So again, dynamic refers to change, whereas dynamical refers to changes in how change happens as it is happening. And when we make these changes, it becomes our new sense of perception. It is making really literally structural changes within our brain. So the central nervous system is communicating with itself, I'm going to say on a millisecond basis, but it's even faster than that. I mean, it's instantaneously changing and reacting and responding to itself. this is really the basis, the science behind why Neuroptimal works. So if this feels a little outside of, you know, a basic course for Neuroptimal, please understand this is what our body does. The brain dynamics that we're talking about means that the brain is always geared towards the general, but never towards an absolute value. So where this comes to play in many different ways is, one of them is when your child learned to walk. You set your child down, they are standing up, and they immediately start lifting their legs. Now, part of that is an instinct that a child has that is just a reflex, because whenever they feel something at the bottom of their feet, they start lifting. But the reason why they do that is so that they can internally learn their own balance. Not every child has an absolute value to how far apart their legs need to be, or the stance that their hips have to be at. And we call that a gait. They don't have an absolute value for a gait. You can't stand a child down and say, you got to be 12 centimeters apart. Sorry, let's move your legs. Instead, you put them down and they start playing and experimenting and using their legs in a way that allows them to find a comfortable gait, a natural gait that is unique to only that one person. And that's exactly what happens all the way down the line. We find that we don't have that absolute value when we're talking about blood pressure. You could take your blood pressure 10 times in a day, and it would probably be different 10 times in a day. It is going to have a general number that makes sense. Generally, we want you at 120/80. We do not want to see your blood pressure go to 140/100. That would be outside of our general terms. But rarely will you get exactly 120/80, and especially not on a regular basis. We are not that absolute. That's the same with our internal temperature. It is never exactly the same. It's always in a range. And that's kind of the process that our bodies go through, that process variability, where we are infinitely cycling and self-regulating. And we do not have these absolute values. There's not a best or an amount that we are always striving for. What we're looking for within those changes or those voltage fluctuations within the brain is duration, intensity, frequency, and shift. And remember, we're looking at the oscillation, which is also called a frequency in the brain. That frequency is going to have a duration. That's the length of the frequency, how long that frequency lasts. It's also going to have an intensity. How strong is that? Is it flaring from the occipital lobe all the way up to the prefrontal cortex? That's the strength, or the amplitude is how we talk about it at times. Then we have the actual frequency. Is it wobbling, or is it a pure frequency? And then we also have a shift. That is, as it is changing, it is shifting. It's doing something different. And that change is monitored in our minds as a shift. Now, when Neuroptimal comes into play, which it will in just a few minutes, you'll understand that, as Mark said earlier, these diffs are how we also measure the change. So the central nervous system is measuring those frequencies by duration, intensity, frequency, and shift. And if something's a little off, then the central nervous system notifies that particular part of the body. Like right this moment, we're all sitting in what we would consider a comfortable position. At some point, that comfortable position is going to be we've sat there long enough that it doesn't feel so comfortable anymore. And so we need to move. Some of you may stand up, some of you may just cross legs in a different way. Some of you may, we all have a different way of moving. It's not a bad position. None of it is a bad position. It's a different position. And that's because at some point our central nervous system noticed, I'm uncomfortable now. And so it moves us away from discomfort. It's saying, for whatever reason, even though this was a great position to be in before, we're now uncomfortable. Let's move. And that's exactly what ends up happening with our central nervous system, is always evaluating our internal status. And it is always telling us that. Our temperature gets too high and we start to run a fever. The body immediately cools it off by sweating. Blood pressure gets too high, our heart starts to actually make you feel a little anxious. And it's just warning you, hey, something's not right inside of here. I'm not comfortable. You're walking on rocks and all of a sudden you start to feel a little unstable. Your balance feels a little off. Your vestibular system's telling you this isn't the normal place that we walk. It's not the same. It's not that there's something always wrong. It's always detecting change as information and giving it back to you. And that information, you are able to cognitively decide, yeah, I realize that I'm a little uncomfortable right now, but I'm in a really tight airplane seat and I can't move right now. I'm going to have to deal with it. Or I'm walking on rocks because I know I'm getting closer to the beach and I want to get to the beach. So I'm going to deal with it. And whatever it is, we experiment with it, we learn from it, we are dynamical. We're always doing, we notice it and we do something about it. Again, this is the premise behind why and how Neuroptimal does what it can do. So when we have a healthy central nervous system, it's flexible. It understands that whatever's going on in our environment is something that it can deal with. It's able to quickly respond to that, and in a way that it doesn't make any difference what it is. You're walking on the rocks, yeah, but not a huge big deal. I can really watch myself long enough to get over all of these big, huge, jaggedy rocks to get to the beach. It's also resilient, meaning that if anything were to change quickly, you're able to adapt to it. Something horrendous just happened. You lost a parent, you lost a child, something in your life just happened. It's the systems that are flexible and resilient that can say, oh my God, this is devastating, but I can live through it. I can move on. I can do what needs to be done. That's what happens when you have a healthy system. When the system is not so healthy, it's not flexible and it's not resilient, and you get stuck and you stay in that same spot and you're not able to deal with what the external or the internal environment is happening. And that's not because there's something horrendously wrong with you. It's just that you lost that ability to be flexible and resilient. What we learn and what we do with Neuroptimal is the ability to become flexible and resilient. So that's why it doesn't matter what diagnosis you have. That's why it doesn't matter what symptoms you have. None of that is important when what we are really retraining, reteaching our central nervous system to do is to respond quickly and to adapt to the changes that need to be adapted to or responded to.